Thank you for staying with the Monday Report. We're reviewing President William Ruto's 3 years in office. On the 13th of September 2025, will be marking exactly 3 years since his inauguration in 2022 in September. Has life gotten better or worse for you? Have things remained the same or have they changed? That's why we're calling it the good, the bad and the ugly. We'd like to hear from you. Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Citizen Monday Report. My guest already with me here in studio, starting from my immediate right, CPA Rispa Olik, finance and governance expert. Thank you very much for making time.
Thank you, Trevor.
We also have Professor Maina Mushara, is a council member, Consumers Federation of Kenya, that is COFEC. Thank you very much for making time.
Thank you.
And FCPA Hesbon Omolo, an economist, is joining us from Dubai. Thank you for staying with us, Hesbon. Let me start with you, Prof. Are we better off now or worse off as a country?
Well, the first thing is, let me first of all bring greetings from the Consumers Federation of Kenya. Consumers, we are the people who, you and I, consume things every day. So the members of Consumers Federation of Kenya are each one of us, and that is why we started this organization. When we ask, are we better off now relative to what we were 3 years ago, or 3 years, the time that President Ruto took over, the answer is not very difficult, because from what I have seen from my own professors, when I did some survey today, everyone says no. But there will be some few individuals maybe that might be better off. And those could be the people who have got very nice government tenders. But ordinary Kenyans, everyone I've talked to, the answer is definitely not. But we can then go to the details later, before we go that way. Yeah. We can use the statistics, but first of all, let's just think about the perception themselves. Okay. And then it is really no.
So for you, it's a definite no.
Yes.
Olik, are we better off today or worse off compared to 3 years ago when President William Ruto took over?
Yes and no. Okay. We have some gains in the sense that when we look at certain things like talking of the economy growing, the GDP is definitely better. Inflation has dropped. The Kenya shilling has gained some strength over time. At the end of the day, probably the question, and Prof has alluded to it a little bit, is the statistics look good. But the big question is, why aren't we feeling this, or we can't turn a deaf ear to the outcry of the common Kenyan or the common Mwananchi? So why is it that people still feel they cannot, they're not appreciating or feeling this impact, this positive statistics that we're talking about? I think that's what we need to dig deep into. Okay,
let me get back to Prof before I bring in Omolo, because Omolo had already responded to this question. Prof, you know, like Olik is saying that the statistics look good. And they do indeed, because in 2022, the inflation was at 9.1%, 2023 it was 6.8, 2024 it was 5.1, early this year it was 4.5, now it's around 3.8. How come the consumers are not feeling this?
You see, Trevor, let's look at those statistics again. The inflation from 2022 to 2024, as we now add the financial year of 2024, cumulatively is about 21%. Cumulatively. It means that your salary needed to have adjusted 21% for you to be at the same level you were 3 years ago. Sometimes statistics, even as we give them, we don't go into the details of those statistics as to what is happening to your disposable income. Because your disposable income is what keeps you going on a daily basis. So if we look at the disposable income that has been available to you in the last 3 years or so, remember SHA came and took 2.75%. That's a huge amount percentage-wise from your pocket. Then we had the housing coming and taking 1.5%. And 1.5% also from the employer, which means, by the way, in total, it is 3%. Why? Because the employer won't add your salary when they are paying a 1.5%. It is really basic economics. So when we look at why is it that people are not feeling it, it is not that they are not feeling it. They are feeling the pain. It is not some perceptions. It's actually the reality. For example, if I was to ask you, Trevor, today, how much fuel do you use to go to home The amount of fuel you put in your car to go home and come back is making you think twice before you go home. That is the pinch we are talking about. So it is the statistics that are given when now you compare to the actual pocket, especially for the employee who has a salary. Definitely you find you are in trouble. Why? Because you look at transport has gone up, food has gone up, housing is an issue, water is an issue, electricity is an issue. So if you look at that cumulatively, you see that in the 3 years that you've been consistently going through this, then the ordinary citizen is not telling you from feelings or perceptions. They are telling you from what they are undergoing. And to me, that is why when we say, are people worse off or not, they are definitely worse off. I'll give you another example, for example. I was just checking on the cut flowers. Cut flowers is one of our biggest export earners, huge export earners. In the last 3-4 years, it dropped by more than 32%. That means then the foreign exchange, and why is it? They're saying one of the reasons they're doing so is because logistic costs have gone up, production costs have gone up, so the productivity of the cut flower farms are down. So you can see it has some effect on us as we move, because it means that even as the shilling is being propped up to stand up a bit, it can't survive for long when the exports are not going out.
Okay. And let me bring in Hesbon on this. Hesbon, before we took the break, you posed a question. And your question was, what are we doing with the taxes that we collect? What do you recommend that would ease the pressure from the people in terms of dealing with the taxes? What more should the government do to ease the pressure from the people?
Thank you, Trevor. I think there are clear signs that the government over the last 3 years has been very aggressive on the tax revenue collection side. And that, of course, we saw in the protest that we had last year. And that has clawed back a bit on the government appetite towards raising additional taxes. And on the flip side of it, once you raise taxes, then you must spend those taxes. Now, what are we spending our taxes on? And one of the things I've always argued, that the government must look at the expenditure side of its budget. We rarely want to look at that. We speak about zero-based budgeting. In actual sense, we do not do that. There is still a lot of wastage. On the issue of what was outlawed today in terms of the transition to EGP, it was touted that it would win off about 300 billion in wastage in terms of how much government spends on certain services. We know of very many issues around bloated wage bill. There are ghost workers across national and county government entities that needs to be weeded out. So, and we read about corruption cases here and there that is dampening the spirit. And these are the things that makes Kenyans feel uncomfortable, even unpatriotic towards paying taxes. And it feeds into what then you would compare as a percentage of GDP. Why are we only collecting 15% when against global standards for countries like ours, we should be generating about 30% of our GDP as taxes? The reason is sometimes as a people, once you realize that the resources are not applied correctly, the propensity or the incentive to be a low tax happy Kenyan in terms of just being able to pay your taxes appropriately is lost. And then we then ask ourselves, what is it that we can do differently? So for me, the government must look at the expenditure side of things, eliminate waste, be very, very deliberate towards curbing corruption. I know we've mentioned the punitive SHA deductions that is hurting. But when, on the other hand, you hear that there are certain people who are benefiting unfairly and illegally in this SHA deduction, that there are certain facilities that are being paid for no delivery of service. How do you feel as a taxpayer when you have been deducted and somebody is taking away your money that you've really painfully paid towards guaranteeing healthcare for the entire population? Because let's face it, Trevor, the 3 or 4 million people who are taxed through the pay system are shouldering a bigger burden of the 54 million Kenyans. You can be happy as a taxpayer if this is working for everyone. But if it happens that there are certain people who are conniving to abuse that system, then even as a Kenyan, you will say, now, why am I being taxed? So I think the government must rein in on graft, because that then takes away even very good initiatives. Because imagine that the entire health ecosystem where people who have been fundraising towards chronic diseases, today you don't hear of Harambes for chronic diseases. But now when you hear about certain elements within the health chain, then you ask yourself, what can you do differently? So one of the things I would recommend for government, especially on things that are riding on aspects of raiding the pocket of Mwananchi, and I mentioned three things. When it comes to social health authority, we must rein in on those crooks. But secondly, in a well-functioning system in a third world country or a developing country like Kenya, you cannot have 40% of a social good like health being in the hands of private sector. That is too high a number, and that is dangerous for a country like ours. We need to claw back. The government must step up its provision of level 1, 2, 3, and 4 services so that public health facilities can be able to handle that. That way, you're able to eliminate some of these things. And secondly, when it comes to deductions around NSSF, I know we've not spoken about this, but it is punitive to the pocket, even though it is good for you in future. When you retire, instead of carrying a check of 700,000 after 60 years of service, you can carry a check of 10 million or thereabout. But what kind of reforms and structures are we putting in NSSF to safeguard this money, including its investment? And I want to invite Parliament to step in early enough so that in 2-3 years, we don't hear of scandals in that space. That way, we are able to ensure that the government spends less in terms of our taxes. But I think the last thing I wanted to mention is that we spend over $1 trillion on debt service. In the last 3 years, we've paid 4.5 trillion to service debt, and we've borrowed another 3.5 trillion. Now, the sad bit is that when you look at our debt service cost, 80% of those, that's 1 trillion, is on domestic debt front, and 20% is on external debt, yet they are of equal value or thereabout. Therefore, we really need to ask ourselves, what can we do so that as a government, we claw back on domestic borrowing and allow the private sector to drive the growth, and that way we can be able to have a nation where people feel that there is growth. And of course, the prices may not go down as we expect. However, the income of the ordinary person needs to grow. And the reason why people are not feeling this growth is that the overall growth in income of Kenyans is about 3.2%, which is way below the growth in terms of inflation. And I think that ties with what the professor was saying.
And that's an interesting thing, Wolik, because you mentioned earlier on that the statistics look good, and you mentioned the GDP, the inflation rates, but it's true that people don't feel it. Is it because as a government, they're focusing on what economists loosely refer to as the base effect, such that you're basing your numbers on an already high figure? So that if last year the fuel prices were higher, you're going to base your inflation reduction based on a figure that was already high anyway. So even if it's reduced by 3.8%, people still don't feel it because it was already high.
Absolutely. And we must appreciate that the current government has navigated a complex landscape, coming from, the weather adversities to the global shockers like COVID. So sometimes trying to analyze and look at where we are coming from and where we are at today may look like it's not too good. But definitely there have been some improvements. Just picking from where FCPA has been left, I think the focus of the government needs to change a little bit. Even as we aim to collect more taxes, for me, I would think of efficiency over expansion. What are some of the things that we need to do to ensure that we collect the tax more efficiently? Maybe plug the leakages that we have. I'm sad that, some of the systems or reforms that we thought would improve things like the e-procurement has just been thrown out, and I hope it's just for a short while. And there are good initiatives that we hope we're going to plug the leakages that we're having. So when you talk of efficiency of expansion, then it means that we spend smarter. We look at our expenditure side of things, not always focusing on the income. And when we also talk of subsidies, Trevor, I've just been thinking, is it that our approach to doing some of these things, like giving the blanket relief, is what is not working for us? Because then in that case, we are not talking of equity. Whatever benefits we're passing blanketly to all citizens, then are diluted because it's the poor man, the rich man, it doesn't really matter. So probably there should be a way that even when you talk of the subsidies or the relief on fuel, it's not only the person who drives a car that benefits from that, but other people. And talking of the revenue that, I mean, the Prof had talked of the purchasing power or the disposable income. Again, we know that currently, those who are earning are hard hit in 3 areas. That is the SHA, adequate housing, deductions, and pension. Of course, we need to look at each and every aspect of these things and see what it is that is there for to benefit the citizens. There's no doubt that people are feeling the pinch, because if your disposable income or your purchasing power has gone down, then you definitely would not appreciate that. In terms of SHA, we are also hoping that these systems are going to improve service. The idea is good, but the implementation, because behind these systems are human beings who are trying to sabotage and do funny things, then it beats logic and just spoils the noble cause or the noble idea that was behind that. Pension, FCPA has already spoken to, hopefully, in a few years, that may not be immediate. But if in your retirement you have maybe 5 million, as compared to 700,000 that you'd have taken home, you definitely would have a better life. And the people coming behind you, like your children, the black tax that we all talk about, will be a thing of the past.
Though there are many variables to that, but we'll delve deeper into it, because first you have to attain that in retirement to begin with. But Prof, as COFEC, you are supposed to protect consumer rights. And I'm glad you mentioned the issue of fuel. And we've seen this all the time. When there's an increase in fuel, the transport cost increases almost immediately. When there's a decrease, it doesn't decrease immediately. What have you as COFEC done to ensure that then you're protecting consumers' rights?
The first thing is that, Trevor, I'm sure your economics teacher told you about stickiness of pricing. The prices, when they go up, they usually refuse to come down. And that has been our biggest challenge, because the wastefulness that we have encountered over the years has accumulated to the level that even if the prices of fuel comes down, the merchants of transport say, this is a time to make some money. And they wait again until the fuel goes up and say, okay, we have to charge you. And because consumers, of course, are caught up in that kind of scenario, the only level of engagement we can truly work on, Trevor, is government. Because that is where the hugest wastage really is. Because if you look at fuel, for example, you know for a fact that the majority of the money that you're paying on fuel is tax. Right? And you look at electricity, the same thing. Now, I liked what CPK Hesbon said about medical, for example. I want to say this without any fear of contradiction, that the minute you make medical to be privately driven, you are in trouble. Medical is an investment in your citizens so that they can produce more. And when they produce more, you tax them. Even if you're taxing very little, you get more taxes. But as you look at the medical system, even with this so-called SHA, they are not paying every bill that you incur. As we speak today, if any member of your family is in a serious medical condition, you are almost guaranteed that you're going to be poor after that. You are going to be impoverished. So when you look at the costs that are coming out, and one of the things that I don't want us to go on so much, because psychologically when you start thinking in some of these things, you become sick. So the best thing is we don't think too much about it. But the reality is this. Medical, for us, when we were extremely few, was free. Free. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever that medical today, with the taxes that we are paying, should not be free. I'll give you a very simple example, which I like giving, because we usually take our students to Malaysia. In Malaysia, with 1 ringgit, which is an equivalent of 30 shillings, you're going to be treated cancer-free from the time you're diagnosed to the chemotherapy to the after-home treatment and so on, free. Here you become a cancer patient. Within 6 months, your whole family finances are gone. So when I look at the amount of money that is going to SHA today, that is money that should be running public hospitals efficiently, with payment of doctors at the highest level in East and Central Africa. We should be seeing the best equipment in all our hospitals across the country with the amount of money that SHA is actually taking. So when we think about the costs of living we are talking about, when medical is taken out, your cost of living improves dramatically. When education is taken out, your cost of living immediately moves up. When your transport system is taken care of, now you can start production. But when you look at all the fundamentals of our economy, the fundamentals, medical, education, agriculture, food, transport, all of them, the costs are extremely high. Why? Because of the inefficiency that my friend has just talked about. Criminality. We are talking about, you remember the previous president saying 2 billion shillings lost in a day.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
2 billion shillings lost in a day. Now it must be 4. You know? Imagine, and that is why I don't even want to be talking about efficiency in tax collection, because we're already collecting too much. If we are losing that much, and we are still having more and more people doing whatever they want to do, then we have more than enough money. And you remember, Trevor, because you are here, when President Kibaki took over, we stopped borrowing externally. We stopped borrowing internally. The treasury bills, just prices went down, interest rates, and we still managed to even take our children to school for free. Where do you think that money has gone? Yeah. Why?
It's all about a change of policy.
Absolutely.
Is that what you're saying?
And one thing is to really not only a change of policy, but a mindset.
Yeah.
And you believe that we can make our country great by efficiency, by less corruption, understanding that this is what we will be living in the next 10, 15, 30, 50 years.
Okay. So Hesbon, just to bring you back on this, so which one is a better strategy as an economist from your perspective? Increase the taxes now for a better future, like what you talked about, pension, or reduce the taxes and broaden the tax base? Which one is the best?
I think we need a combination of issues, but we need to appreciate that, first of all, maybe just before I get to that, Prof has alluded to the fact that during Kibaki presidency, we were able to get free primary education. It was just free primary education. After that, I think the other costs applied. But I think the overriding thing is that we did what we call rebasing of our GDP in 2014. What many Kenyans do not know the implication of that, and that was one of the first things that President Uhuru did. We essentially moved from a poor or a low-income country to a middle-income country, and that allowed us to get into a space where we could get access to commercial debts, and that is why Eurobond came in. The unfortunate bit with that is that we lost the opportunity to borrow cheaply, and therefore some of the loans we could access easily during the Kibaki era were now out of our space because of our action of rebasing our GDP. But having said that, now coming back to what is it we can do differently, let's look at our GDP. It keeps growing, but which is the biggest contributor to our GDP? It's agriculture. Now, how do we make money in the agricultural sector? Other than what we produce for consumption, we make money mostly on our export of our commodities. 70 to 80% of our agricultural exports are not processed. Basically, we are not doing any value addition. And even though we have tried as a country to have those minimum guaranteed prices for items such as coffee and tea, we are therefore losing an opportunity to double or triple the income of the people in the agricultural value chain, and that could bring in a lot of money. So that is something we need to look at very strongly. The various county aggregational centers that we had purpose to have in each of the 47 counties have not progressed much 3 years down the line. I think we need to get back there so that we make it a deliberate strategy to ensure that we only export more finished products. That would help us in terms of strengthening that space. But having said that, beyond that, the payslip is rated for 3 reasons, and a very strong feeling that even though the pain is on the pocket, I would justify these 3 things on 3 grounds. When you reduce my income because of social health authority, it is painful for the 4 million who are paying. But if it is going to help the country to have medical cover for 54 million Kenyans, up from the 7 million that we had under NHIF, and you root out corruption and Medicare is provided, and we can get to a situation where nobody sells his land or our land for medical attention in the name of chronic diseases, that is a pain any Kenyan would be happy to have. The story is, can that be achieved? That is, the jury is out there. Secondly, when affordable housing deduction is taken off my payslip, to guarantee affordable housing scheme across the country, as well as move away from the slums where people use flying toilets, that is, to be able to survive through the night, for a better country, I would also be happy as long as an employer, tomorrow I know if I pay my employees 60,000 shillings in a Nairobi city that is expensive, that person can afford a house of 15 or 20,000. That serves the greater good, because housing is not just a private space that you leave to the market forces. The government has a responsibility. Otherwise, you become a very expensive destination, and housing is a key component of labor. And therefore, if housing is expensive, you price the worker out of town. I think that is something, if only it is done in an organized manner, that serves the intended purpose. And finally, when it comes to NSSF, it's about where do I retire? Statistics are grim, Trevor, that in 2 years post-retirement at 60, 40% of retirees die. Why? That is the time when your healthcare costs go up. That's the time when cash is king. If we can be able to guarantee retirement and NSSF value is preserved and their funds are invested appropriately to grow and guarantee the retirees decent livelihoods post-retirement, that is something that as a person you would take, knowing my future is secured. Yeah. Unfortunately, if this is not done and you hear scandals in future, that would worry me. And that's why I suggested earlier on that let's preempt problems. Yeah. Let's forestall problems in future by putting adequate controls. You cannot grow the value of NSSF double in 2 years compared to what we've done since independence and not think or pause for a moment and ask yourself, what kind of controls and safeguards can we put around this money? I think if we're able to do that, that would help. But reducing deductions or taking them away at this point in time, maybe we can retain SHA and NSSF, but once the affordable housing scheme takes root and a critical base that can support continuous investment in housing into the future that we did in the years, then over time we can drop affordable housing so that we ease the pressure. Okay. But let's have controls that guarantees a better housing for the country, because it is key to economic progress as it's a factor of labor.
All right, I'll come to social media conversations in just a bit, and there's also a question for you there from Bob Noel. I'll come to that shortly. But Olik, do you agree with what Omolo is saying, that those sacrifices are worth it if the structures are proper? Or what do you recommend going forward so that the people feel the pressure easing off them?
Of course, most of the recommendations he's given is kind of to make the salaried employees or those who are deducted from their pay slips feel the worth of these deductions. And true, like I said, they're noble ideas. When your medical is taken care of, when your pension is taken care of, and decent housing is provided. So all these things are good. But like he says, let us ensure that we have safeguards so that this money is not going into wrong hands, and tomorrow, we don't achieve the purpose for which, the intended purpose.
Yeah.
One other thing that I'd like to add, probably just to speak to the numbers that do not match the reality.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is it something that we should consider breaking down the cost of, when we talk of inflation and other things? Because when it's a blanket number like that, the core things like transport, food, fuel that Wanjiku is looking at probably is all wrapped up in there. And there are several other things that are looked at that speak to these numbers and statistics. So probably those who give us these numbers should think of a way of breaking it down, and we get to look at the key things that Wanjiku is interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're talking food, fuel, transport, because if the cost of matatu for going to work for you is what, means a lower or a better cost of living, and you're not seeing that reduction in fare, people are paying more transport to get from point A to B. You're buying probably milk or sugar at a higher price. And the fuel, like I said, for the mama mboga, you're still buying your fuel, for the kerosene or whatever it is that they use at a higher cost. Then they don't feel the impact of this cost of living or the inflation that you're seeing has gone down.
So are you saying what they're basing their numbers of prosperity is not real? Should they do
it could be real, but it could be broken down.
Okay.
So that we have a differentiation of the core cost of living calculation, but we also have a number that now speaks to this particular group of things that Wanjiku is interested in.
Okay.
I'm just giving this as a wild thought out there. And of course, the other thing that Hezbon has spoken to, which I agree to, the deduction on adequate housing. Of course, we've seen the projects that are going on across the country, and they're huge, quite impressive. We hope like in a short while, maybe 1-2 years, people will have taken up those houses and we'll see a reduction of the slums. But this deduction cannot go on for long. If people are going to buy these houses, then let that money come back and revolve and be used to build up more houses if there's need.
Okay.
Yeah.
Prof, from a consumer's perspective, do you agree with those deductions, even if the safeguards are there, or what do you recommend going forward?
One thing for sure is that we would definitely support deductions that bring better welfare to the society. But when the deductions are, for example, the 2.75 on showers, outrageous. It is still outrageous, right? Looking at the level of contributions that people are with no maximum cap. So that if you're getting a salary of 200,000 shillings, you look at your pay slip every month and you're like, really? And you can't even get a proper bed in hospital after paying this? So, well, it is something that consumers would definitely support for the good of society. And even housing. Housing is something that each one of us want to see. And we would like to be seeing it happening. But when we notice that the benefits are not really accruing as expected, and some few individuals are the ones who are getting bigger and bigger cars to drive around, of course the consumers get unhappy. And that really is the reason as to why you're seeing the normal mwananchi, Wanjiku, is unhappy. Because truly, one, they have sacrificed and they have paid share. They have sacrificed, they have paid housing levy. They have sacrificed, they have paid their pay and so on. They have sacrificed, they have paid so much taxes. But all the returns. So we would support if we were seeing
the benefit.
That benefit.
Okay. All right, let me bring in some feedback coming in here. But before we get into that, Hezbon, there's a direct one here for you. There's someone who says, this is Bob Dolo. He says, what became of the audit on pending bills in which you served as a committee member? Timely settlement of these bills to contractors and suppliers would stimulate money circulation in the economy and enhance purchasing power. That is from Bob Dolo.
Thank you, Trevor. I think, of course, the pending bills verification committee headed by FCP Edward Ouko, in which I'm a member, our work is almost as good as done. Of course, the decision to settle is not entirely with us, but I can't speak beyond that because I'm not authorized to speak on behalf of the committee. But I would say that part of the challenge we've had with our economy is that a lot of money has been withheld in terms of pending bills, both at national level and at county government level. What we were dealing with were pending bills, and I think the last disclosure, we started at close to 700 billion in terms of what we are verifying, and that exercise is soon coming to an end. And we are hopeful that subsequent to that, the government will have a mechanism in place towards settling the same. But as that happens, also the onus on county governments, which owe approximately 200 billion to the business people at the local grassroots level as well, needs to step in and also settle their bills, because ultimately these are the things that makes it very difficult for the common man in an economy that is largely informal. If you take money from the bank and you're not able to get the counties to or national government entity to pay you, you are going to default, and that is what also brings up the non-performing loans across the various financial institutions, and banks then shy away from lending to you and I and focus on lending to government. And at the end of the day, it's a lose-lose situation. The government doesn't benefit, even though as we speak today, the CBR rate has dropped to 9.5, but you realize the difference between the CBR rate and what commercial banks are charging the ordinary borrowers is a spread of almost, in fact, it's rivaling double digits, almost 15.5% on the lower end. That is not sustainable. So you ask yourself, how risky is a private sector for the banks to lend? So there are certain things we need to look at that would be depriving the banking sector from lending the common man, including law and order. How reliable is the land system that you can trust a title? How fast do we litigate and decide cases in court? All these things end up being part of the pricing risk. And therefore, all arms of government must work effectively and discharge their mandates. Ultimately, then the benefits percolate to the common man.
All right, let's bring up some feedback here and see what you're saying online at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Citizen Monday Report as we wind up on this conversation. John Musangi says, from my point of view, the cost of living has increased. The ordinary citizens are suffering a lot more, especially on side of tax, okay? Sir Nixon says, surely the cost of living has gone higher. Maybe it's time I admit that life has taken an upward trajectory in relation to generational change, just like what happened when my dad was a youth and used to buy bread at 40 cents, okay? Munga Raphael says, the question is not about the price, it's about affordability. Flour at 130 is unaffordable to a jobless person, while it's cheap to someone earning $100. The government ought to make life affordable, not cheap. Okay. Ruto says, how does the government of President William Ruto expect people to feel the state of affordable cost of living when the prices of goods are either decreasing proportionately with earnings of citizens, or both changing disproportionately up or down? Gabi says, on job creation, more than 320,000 youth are working at different affordable housing sites in the country. Over 400,000 Kenyans have been placed in international positions across healthcare, agriculture, construction, and other sectors, courtesy of labor mobility. Okay. Linus says, the low inflation masks deeper issues of high public debt, tax burdens, weak job creation, and sluggish private consumption. Ruto's administration has reduced the rate of price increase while ignoring the absolute cost of living. Okay. And Malinde says the government should remove all duties on motorcycles so that more youth can buy bodabodas to create employment for that chain, but also will increase fuel consumption. This is what Kibaki did to spur economic growth. Okay. Michael from Narok says, my home is 14 kilometers away from Narok. With 1,000 shillings, I can't go to buy anything in town. Life hapa chini ni mbaya. Okay. Engineer Lazaro says government should move with the speed to control rising cost of living, deal with the corruption, control wage bills and meaningless expenditures to grow an economy. Government should just focus on punitive taxations. Okay. Yantika says gross domestic product, that is a GDP, and other statistics may not reflect the true picture of what majority of citizens are experiencing vis-a-vis a country's economy. Economists can attest to my assertion. Okay. Isaac says our economy is like a forest. Lush trees, dense vegetation cover and uniform treetops from afar. When you get inside, there are thorny trees, dead animals and alligators. Prices of cooking oil, sugar are steadily rising. Tunachezwa. Okay. Closing remarks on this, and Olika, I'll start with you. So from here on now, what are the quick wins? You talked about subsidies, but is that the lasting solution? And you've mentioned that that also comes, the blanket relief doesn't work. So what are the quick wins for the government at this particular point where we are?
So, Trevor, as you've heard from the feedback we're receiving, I believe that faster relief would build stability. Whichever form or however we're going to do that, to just relieve the citizens from the burden that they're going through currently. Because ignoring the cost of living crisis would just lead to social unrest, like we've seen, people complaining. And that shows lack of the lack of trust, the trust deficit in the leadership. So stability itself has a fiscal value, because we know when protests happen, there's disruption to business, reduced investor confidence, and slow growth. So that relief needs to happen, and happen like today. Delivering targeted and timely relief is not just about social policies. For me, it's an economic risk management, because when we look at it holistically, really, this needs to happen. If it's about, the pesa ya wazee we are giving, the relief that would just lower cost of unga for the today now, those long-term interventions are good, but the common mwananchi or Wanjiku needs the relief today. Today,
okay. Prof?
The first thing that I really want to emphasize is that we need to stop privatizing social goods. Social goods are things like education, medical, and transport. When, for example, you privatize roads and people have to pay a toll, that is a cost that is extremely high. So if we really want to get back our economy and we start growing, the first one is let's stop this privatization of social goods. Let's invest in our people. Education is an investment, medical is an investment, agriculture is an investment, because healthy people who are eating well produce more. When you produce more, the taxes come in. And that is something that even the oldest economists developed a long time ago. So that's the first one that I would like us to really do. Then the next one is the issue of corruption. Really, I don't understand why we talk about it. Because it requires only simple, basic belief in integrity. And we can handle it. And you remember, Trevor, that in 2003, Kenyans were arresting policemen who were taking bribes. That shows how quickly it is that corruption can stop. But corruption cannot stop until the head is leading the war. So to me, if we did that, the wins we are talking about, the prices of unga will come down, the prices of transport will come down, and we're going to notice a tremendous increase in the private sector productivity. I'll give you a very simple example, as my colleague was talking about the pending bills. From the small, medium enterprises that I deal with consistently, the number of people who have gone bankrupt because they supplied the county governments, they supplied the national government. If you look at today's nation, out of 12.5 advertised pages, 10 were auctions. 10. Those are all Kenyans who had a lot of hope, but their properties are being disposed. So when we talk about pending bills, I don't even understand why we continue talking about it, because it has even gone to the extent of causing death to some people. So to me, that should be handled, especially for those who really supplied goods, because most of the people who suffer on the pending bills are the genuine suppliers. The characters who have got briefcases, they flee off a long time ago. So to me, those are things that we can do today.
Okay. Hesbon, as you close on this, is it time for some subsidies for the Kenyan people? That is not sustainable.
Let me start from that. I think subsidies may not be sustainable as we speak now, From where I sit, I think we have a case where you need to look at the chicken, but also look at the fox. What mistake did the fox do? What mistake did the chicken do? Kenya currently has a tax to GDP of about 15%. The truth is, the people who are bearing the biggest brunt of our tax measures are those who are employed. Majority of Kenyans are joyriders, and I dare tell Kenyans on their face. And there is evidence to that effect. The last time KRA brought in what they call the special table for VAT, the VAT threshold and turnover, and in terms of collection, the last 3 months to the end of financial year went skyrocketed up, which means that people who don't want to pay taxes around that space. So there are so many people within our economy that are not keen to pay taxes. So I think at some point we'll have to decide as a country, are we too special that our private businesses that we hide from government in terms of taxes must remain within our space in the name of privacy? In South Africa, the veil is lifted and the tax response is very high. You will not even need to borrow more. The issues would be, how do you use the money better? Secondly, I'm not a proponent of an education system where everybody who does Form 4 goes to university at government expense. The society education system must mirror a pyramid where you limit the number the government sponsors to university. The rest who still need to get it then need to pay, so that we control our expenditure, especially at the very high level. But between primary to secondary, offer quality education that allows you to exit and be meaningfully employed and be part of somebody who can stand on his own. Beyond that, we must be realistic, because that is part of the reason why our education system is being messed up. Now, reforms in the expenditure, EGP is a good thing. Let the Treasury go back to the drawing board, bring in the law so that you don't just bring in a system, have adequate consultation and roll it out, because it's the panacea for us to address some of the challenges we're having. And then the issue of labor mobility is a good thing. Those who can find opportunities out there, let's support them and give them the necessary support, because we can see the benefit in terms of our diaspora remittance, which is very high, and that has supported the stability of the shilling to a point where we have almost 6 months cover in terms of imports. That is an indication that we are doing the right things. And finally, when it comes to issues of pending bills, can we find a way to release close to $1 trillion of pending bills that is owed to the business community? Automatically, 30% of that money will come back to government as taxes. And once that happens, then you will have spurred the economy so that we don't just talk about a growing GDP when if you unpack it, it doesn't really percolate to the common man down there. And I think that is part of the reason why there is complaint and cries everywhere. Yep. The private sector is not able to pay the banks, and the business people are closing, some are committing suicide because things have become very difficult. If we were to find a way to unlock those spaces, I think the economy is generally in the good direction. And finally, Trevor, these challenges did not start today. By 2022, when this regime came into place, some of these things are already clearing. And I think it's important that as Kenyans, we address our challenges, but also find a way through which we can find commonality and have dialogue on some of these difficult spaces, especially the cost of living, which is hurting the common man. If we need to relook at it, I'm not for subsidy, but are there interventions that we can have that can be able to support the consumer, even if it's on the production side? We need to address that rising cost of living, which is a reality from the comments that have come from members that indeed things are not very easy, and therefore sometimes you loosen the belt a bit for the benefit of people. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for making time for us this evening. FCPA's Bonomola, an economist, speaking to us from Dubai. Professor Maina Mushara, Council Member, Consumers Federation of Kenya, that is COFEC, and CPA Rispa Olik, Finance and Governance Expert. And thank you all for speaking to us this evening. And thank you for tuning in. That marks the beginning of our Ruto at 3 continued series over the entire month. We'll talk about several issues: healthcare, education, governance, all of it. Think of it. Today, we've talked about the cost of living, and we appreciate all your feedback coming through to the Monday Report. On behalf of everyone who made this possible, we say good night and God bless.